So do you know what is one of the most addictive drugs in the world? It's a drug that we turn to when we find ourselves in despair about the state of our own life or the state of our family or our nation or our planet. It's a drug that we grasp for, hoping that it will inspire us and motivate us and energize us, but usually it doesn't. Instead, it locks us into this vicious bipolar cycle of hope and fear, which seem on the surface to be very different, but when you scratch below, they're kind of often two sides of the same coin. So what is this most addictive drug? It's what Margaret Wheatley calls hopium. Hopium. Holocaust survivor Hannah Arendt argues that hopium is one of the most dangerous barriers to acting courageously in dark times because it blinds us from seeing what is possible, what we can do. It anesthetizes us from reality, and it paralyzes us and prevents us from being the instrument of change that we all can be. Today, as we begin this season of Advent, a season of waiting for Christ's birth, we're going to explore the question, what can't wait? What can't wait? And on the first Sunday of Advent, where we light the hope candle, we will try to distinguish between hopium and hope. For the prophet Isaiah is not a drug peddler. He's not selling us hopium. He is proclaiming a hope. He's casting a vision that not only inspires us, but it's a vision that we're called to put into practice in our own lives, to usher in the promised day of God's kingdom coming on earth as it is in heaven. Pastor Stephen Montgomery shared an experience that he had going out, taking a ferry to an island off the coast of Maine. And on the way out to the island, it was like a sheet of glass. He just sailed right out there, no problems at all. But the storm came in, the waters got choppy, the waves became violent, and the storm began to affect him. And he realized within a few minutes there was a storm brewing in his belly. And so the pilot noticed this and said to Pastor Montgomery, look, sit down and find some place on the ground and focus on it. And so he did. He set his sights on the rocky shoreline, and he found the highest point, this rocky peak where there was a lighthouse. And he fixed his gaze upon that, and as he did so, over time, his stomach calmed, his breath deepened, his mind cleared, and he realized, I'm going to make it. And he did. In many ways, the world that the prophet Isaiah lived in was choppy, chaotic, unjust, violent. Israel was a storm-tossed nation, threatened on all sides by the Assyrians and the Egyptians, and the leaders were in self-preservation mode, and they were not paying attention to the needs of the people they were called to serve. It was a dog-eat-dog, every man for himself, I'll get mine, you get yours kind of a world. And in that world, the conventional response is twofold. There are the people who say, well, there's nothing we can do about it. We can't change it. This is the way it always is. It's the way it's always going to be. And so I might as well just go with the flow. And then there were the people who were so frightened, they built up their security system to ward off the attackers and to protect what was theirs or what they thought was theirs. And in the midst of all of this storm, there was one voice that stood out. And it still stands out. The voice of the prophet Isaiah, who says, look, focus your eyes on the shoreline, upon the mountain, on the house of the Lord, for it shall rise and be established as the highest of all mountains, and all peoples and all races and all nations will come and say, let us make our way together to the mountain of the Lord, that he may teach us his ways and we may walk in his paths. For he shall judge between the nations, and he shall decide among the peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation shall not lift up sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore. Is he a drug peddler? Is Isaiah selling hopium, or is he casting a vision that is connected to reality? It's so easy to hear those words and say how disconnected they seem to be from reality, but isn't it true in your life and in the life of our nation and our world? Isn't it true that a sickness can overcome us when we are afraid and we are worried about the future? And isn't it true that when we are sick, we are drawn into this vicious cycle of violence which promises to free us from insecurity, but doesn't do that and only deepens our insecurity? Isn't it true that violence, which is our go-to response when we feel threatened, creates more problems than it ever solves and fails to address the root cause of our suffering in the first place? Isn't it true that the only time things change for the better is when a group of people, sometimes a remnant, is able and willing to fix their mind, to fix their heart, to fix their soul and their body on a God-given vision that can, in the end, address the problems that violence tries to solve? It's important to note here that the Hebrew phrase that Isaiah begins with, which is translated in the New Revised Standard Version as "in the days to come," or in the times to come, or about to pass. It literally means in the back of the days. That's an important distinction. Do you feel the difference? In the days to come, in the back of the days. Present, but in the background. Present, but we don't always see it. Present, it's imperceptible, it's subtle, but it's there. It's there in the back of the days. The prophet reminds us that the present moment is pregnant with the Spirit of God. We are the ones who don't look for the signs of hope. We don't give ourselves. We don't see them. So what I want to do throughout this series of Advent, I want to look at these videos and see what God is doing in our neighborhood. Things that we may have missed, but things that are as real as this pulpit. So today we're going to learn about what City Relief is doing, one of our mission partners. So let's watch.
Josiah, it is good to be with you today on the corner of Jackson and Grand here at your mobile outreach on Thursday here in Patterson. And a couple years ago, at the height of the pandemic in 2020, we were learning about the ways your organization had to pivot in order to meet the growing needs. Could you tell us a little bit today about how things have changed and where you are as an organization today?
Yeah, we're just so grateful that we were able to survive the last 2 years. It's been very challenging, and the issues that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic are lingering. The economy, obviously, the impacts of COVID and cost of living have just gone up. Rents have skyrocketed, which has pushed a lot of people who were housed before 2020 into the street. But we are continuing to show up because we know that our work has never been more urgent or necessary. So we are here in the streets, we're serving, we're giving out meals, we're giving out socks, we're giving out toiletries, and most importantly, we're creating that human connection for a very isolated population so that we can hopefully point them to a brighter future where they don't have to come to our outreach for their meal, and they can just come by to say hello and visit with our team.
That's amazing what you get to do here regularly to serve the people of Patterson. What are some of the biggest challenges that you are seeing that the people that you serve are facing on a daily basis?
One of the things that we see a lot that people don't often think about is the need for ID. You realize that you can't get housing. You can't even get a job. The first thing on a job application when you fill it out says, ask for your name and what? Your address. And when you go into that interview, you actually have to provide identification to verify you are who you say you are. So as an organization, we've actually decided to step into that gap and provide City Relief IDs for people that we're working with and people that we can verify who they are, so that hopefully they can use that as one step towards stability. The first person who actually received an ID from us, I'll never forget seeing his picture come through, because he saw his picture on an ID with his name and he started to cry, because having the verification of his existence, it was something that actually affirmed his value as a human being that is intrinsic.
That's a real great gift, and something, again, we would never even imagine is having such an impact on people. As you are serving here in Patterson, where are the ways and what are you seeing as hope in the terms of the lives of those you're serving, but also in your personal life and those of your staff and as an organization as a whole?
I think one of the biggest hope killers is isolation and loneliness, and even that's something our guests experience every day. The other thing that people don't realize is that hope is really one of the solutions to homelessness. I used to tell people that there's not a homelessness problem as much as a hopelessness problem, because the reality of despair and how that sets in someone's mind and heart when they've been rejected, they've failed, they've been turned away so many times, eventually you just give up. Eventually it's actually more painful to keep trying than it is to be rejected and to fail. What we're trying to do as an organization is provide that spark of hope that might be very minor, or might appear minor, but just like a spark is minor, is small, can grow into a big flame and grow into a big fire. We want to be that spark with everything that we do.
And I know you mentioned that you're giving socks away today. Can you say a little bit about how one pair of socks could be a spark of hope for someone in their life?
People's feet are really important when you have to walk everywhere. And so what we've discovered is that just giving someone a new pair of socks, not a donated pair, not a used pair, but a new pair of socks, can really just communicate value and hope to the person, to say, we see your need, we see what you're going through, we want to help you get through one more day. Because a pair of socks may only get them through another day, but then hopefully we'll be back the next day and we can keep trying and keep helping them move forward.
Josiah, is there anything else that you would like us to know about what you're doing and how you're serving and how you might need help?
We are seeing more need than I've seen ever in 12 years of working in the street. So I want to remind people that the needs are huge, and while it's tempting to sort of withdraw because we're all sort of just tired, we're all fatigued, like, oh my gosh, more COVID, more news, more, like, it's tempting to do that, but we need people to engage. Like, we need people who have resources to continue to show up and invest in their communities of faith that are then supporting organizations like City Relief, like Westside is. And so we are just, the biggest message I want to send to your community is thank you. Honestly, the way that you guys have generously just come alongside of organizations like City Relief, you're making sure that we are able to stay present for people who have been abandoned. And I can't think of anything more incarnational than that.
Well, Josiah, thanks for what you do and for your time today. We're really grateful.
Now, this may surprise you, but I have never been pregnant. I know some of you haven't either, but I know some of you have. So remember, those of you that have been pregnant, that first moment where you wondered whether you felt something within your body. And I remember that moment, and remember yourself thinking, did that really happen? Was that movement real? Or did I just imagine it? Was it wishful thinking, perhaps? And the only way that you knew for sure was to get quiet and still and listen as deeply as you could to what was happening. That's what a prophet does. Many of us, been taught that prophets predict the future. The only way they predict the future is by pointing out what's happening in the present. A gifted prophet shows us what's happening in the back of the days. Things that we miss because they're in the background. They're hidden, imperceptible. We don't pick up on it. A gifted prophet challenges us to see what God is already doing and to give oneself more wholeheartedly to participate in what God is doing. What can't wait in the season of Advent is hope. Not the passive hope that blinds us and anesthetizes us and paralyzes us from doing the very thing that we can do, but the active hope that truly does energize us and calls us to embody it in the ways that we all can. As Josiah said, it often takes just a spark to get things going. The late Desmond Tutu shared a spark in his life. It was a very short meeting with Anglican priest Trevor Huddleston, a white man. And Huddleston, who Mandela said did more for black people than any white person who ever lived in the slums of Johannesburg in the 40s and 50s. And one day, Tutu observed Huddleston interact with Tutu's mother, who was a black woman, a cook in a women's hospital. And Tutu recalled, "I was standing with my mother when this tall white man in a flowing black cassock swept past. He doffed his hat to my mother in greeting, and I was taken aback. A white man raising his hat to a black woman. Such things did not happen in real life." This moved Tutu so powerfully, not because it was an act of kindness and respect, but because it was the embodiment of Christianity's vision that all people, regardless of status or ethnicity or disability or gender or sexual orientation, whatever you want to fill in the blank with, all people are created in the image of God, beloved of God, and contain within them the divine spark. And that spark, that revolutionary belief, when it is lived out as it was in Huddleston's life and Tutu's life, does have the power to move mountains. And that vision in South Africa did not blind people to what they could do. It didn't anesthetize them. It didn't paralyze them. It inspired them to courageously embody this vision. And it literally moved the mountain of apartheid. So as we wait during this season of Advent, what can't wait is hope. Elia Delio writes, "We ourselves are not the source of that hope," which is to say that we don't manufacture it, we don't create it, but the source dwells deeply within us and flows to us with an unstinting abundance, so much so that it might be more accurate to say we dwell within hope. It does exist, and we can find it. But it all means very little if in finding hope we don't act upon it and embody it and become the instruments in our families, in our communities, in our nation, and in our world. It all means very little if we don't join the army of people recovering from hopium addiction and learning to embody real, genuine hope. It all means very little if we don't wake up as people around us are falling asleep. It means very little if we don't join in and participate when others are dropping out. It means very little when we don't speak up when others are becoming silent. As we prepare for the birth of Christ, let's remember that the violence of Rome, the injustice of Rome, was not overcome with passivity or counter-violence. It was overcome through the creative power of pregnancy. And an ordinary woman willing to receive and cooperate with a God-given vision, who simply said these words, "Here I am, a servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your will." Amen.